All right, it's Jeff here from Nichols Astrology. So I'm just this is the second video in the series. I'm trying to give an overview of the basics of astrology, like I explained in the last video, which you can watch up here. It's going to be a playlist of the basics because I have been reading birth charts for free, and the biggest complaint is like I don't go over the basics. It's very time consuming and it takes a lot of practice and study to understand these concepts at a deep knowledge. So I'm just going to go ahead and make these video series to explain the basics so I don't spend your time and money if you're a paying customer, which I do appreciate. If you did sign up for a reading with me, so you can go back to these videos, get a basic understanding of everything, then I can get into the meat of your chart, how these energies affect you, if that makes sense. So as you can see, astrology is kind of confusing. Like you got all these little points, these weird little symbols that you may not know what they mean. You're probably familiar with all the signs, Libra, Virgo, Leo, all those. Houses are probably a little less familiar to you, but I'll get to those. And these little lines here going everywhere to all these little planets are called aspects. I'm going to break this down chunk by chunk so it's more understandable. Okay, so I'm going to go and start off with the 10 planets. So you're probably wondering, 10 planets, there's technically only 8. Well, in astrology, we kind of include the sun, the moon, and Pluto has been demoted to a dwarf planet as of recent. But in astrology, we call them planets. I try to get into have them calling placements because I think that makes more sense. Because a lot of people, dismiss astrology, and if you call the sun a planet, that's kind of ridiculous in their minds. And I guess it's a fair point. But I'm gonna break these down one by one. Okay, so we're gonna start off with our sun. Again, this is my chart, just using it as an example, not trying to explain me. This is a chart I'm most familiar with, and I'm most familiar with myself. So hopefully that makes sense as I kind of explain these energies. So the sun is a little circle with a dot in the middle. Kind of as we know from school, the sun kind of is the overarching energy. It's the ruler of the solar system. Everything orbits around it. It's so massive and so bright. It gives us life. It gives us warmth. It's so massive that the gravitational pull kind of creates the orbits for all the planet and keeps everything in line and keeps us from floating away in space, I guess is what I could say. So in astrology, what does it mean? Everybody knows, well, yeah, I got a sun sign in Leo, and that's pretty much what most people know. And that's kind of why astrology gets so much flack, I think. But the sun sign is kind of the overarching energy of your chart. It's your ego. It's kind of the culmination of all these other energies that are in the chart. It's kind of like your basic personality. There's something called the ascendant, which I deleted, which we'll get into a little bit because I want to get to the quote unquote planets. But it's kind of your leadership style. It's kind of how you kind of express yourself to the world. It can also represent kind of the way you express the way you feel joy, what kind of makes you feel happy, what makes you feel sane. It's kind of like if you have some mental health illnesses and stuff like myself, it can give you an idea how it can kind of help alleviate some of that emotional pain you may be suffering. It's kind of how you're supposed to show yourself and express yourself to the world, your source of creativity. It could also represent things like romance and things like that as well. But it's kind of the overarching energy, and it's kind of the boss of it. So there's a good side and there's a bad side to all the planets, placements, whatever you want to call them. So your sun sign can be egotistical. It can be kind of narcissistic. It kind of all about me. It can kind of just be like attention seeking, and kind of it wants to take all the fame and glory and credit and things like that. So it can be kind of stuck up, but it also, like I said, it shows kind of like your own self-expression, your leadership style, and all that. And it's considered one of the big three. You got the sun, the next one is the moon, which is one of the big three. And this is kind of your emotional state. Like the moon is water energy, while the sun is fire energy. Kind of like why you argue, well, how do these celestial bodies really influence us? But the moon, if you think about it, controls the tides of the earth, and we're like 80% water. So why wouldn't it control us? But the moon, anyways, is your overall emotional undercurrent. It's kind of like your emotional state, kind of like how you need to be emotionally fulfilled to make yourself happy. It could also be about kind of your intuition and how the dream state and things like that. So it's kind of something that you really need to fulfill and nurture. It shows how you are nurtured and how you need to be cared for and how you need to be loved and accepted for the way you are in order to be happy, basically. And this is something else, like fulfilling your moon can help alleviate some mental anguish as well. Next, we're going to go on the actual planets. So this is Mercury. Another thing about astrology is the traditional said, like, this is male and this is female. Like the sun is male and the moon is female. That's not true. This is more of the sun is more of a masculine energy and the moon is more feminine energy, while Mercury is androgynous. Kind of, it embraces both male and female aspects. So it's kind of the trickster of the solar system. It kind of plays tricks. There's like a story of Hermes, the Greek god. When he was a child, he stole Apollo, the sun god's cattle, and kind of played a big trick on him. And Zeus and Apollo were so impressed, they kind of hooked him up with some cool shit. I don't know the exact story, but it's fun reading about the ancient gods, the Greek gods, and Roman gods to kind of learn where these planets got their energy and oddly how it kind of works in our day-to-day lives. But Mercury is also about how you express your intellect, like your intellectual ability, how you learn and how you communicate, how you talk to others. It's kind of become like a pop culture thing about Mercury retrograde. It happens for about a 3-week period, and there's a 3-week retro shade and a retro shade before and after the retrograde. It happens a lot because, and it's so brief because it takes Mercury about 88 days to orbit around the sun. And in astrology, the sun and Venus never get too far from the sun sign. I think it's 28 degrees for Mercury and like 40 something for Venus, which we'll get in degrees a little bit later. But anyways, this is how you express your intellect and how you express your communication styles and you express yourself, really. Next is Venus. Yes, and that is the symbol for women. Like I said, in traditional astrology, they would assign this as the woman and Mars as the male and things like that. But it doesn't matter if you're male or female. We all have a Venus placement and we all have a Mars placement. And this is how we express our femininity. This is about beauty, love, relationships, art. It's about what we perceive as beautiful and how we create something and exhibit as beauty, kind of what we find beautiful in a personal sense. It's how we relate to people. It's kind of what we seek in relationships and how we kind of feel like we can relate to others. It's also kind of like an artistic thing. So it's kind of like a spiritual, emotional energy and art, writing, however you consider art to you. Like mine is in Virgo and it's a very analytical sign. And it's also in the 11th house, which is pretty analytical as well. So I express what I think is beautiful and find beautiful in intellectual manners, kind of with data and information, kind of like why I'm presenting this. Like astrology is kind of like an art to me. This is like a canvas. All these planets and stuff are the colors, and I like to think I paint people pictures. Next on the line is Mars. That is a symbol for men, masculinity, and is how we express our masculinity. There's also, like I said, good and negative things to every planet. Let me go back to Venus real quick. Venus, like some of the downsides, it could be vanity. It could be about, being vain, kind of conceited. It can be kind of conniving and manipulative. Kind of like you can picture like a woman who's beautiful and she uses her looks to get her way with men and manipulate men or kind of get what she wants out of life that way. Start this over with Mars. So next is Mars. And if you would notice, this is a symbol of men. It's how we express our masculinity. It's about action, taking action, how we assert ourselves in life, kind of like where we need to go, our ambitions and our motivation. It can also be about like sports, like it's in Sagittarius. Like this is a very fire sign. This is a fire sign with a fiery planet. So it can be about athletic endeavors. And it could also, the negative sides, it could be about war or quote unquote toxic masculinity. It could be about fighting and aggression and anger and things like that. So it can be kind of good or it can be kind of bad. It could also be about like protection, courage, kind of like first responder energies, like going in the face of danger for the sake of safety of others. Next, we got Jupiter, but it's not stupider. Okay, we're starting to get out to what they call the generational planets. It takes Jupiter about 1 year to get through each sign and about 12 years to go all the way around the sun and back to where it started. But Jupiter Like I said, in traditional astrology, they look at things as good and bad. This was the great benefic in traditional astrology, meaning that it's like whatever it touches is kind of gold. And here it's in the house of Capricorn, which would have been in its detriment, meaning like this is the worst thing. This is the worst place Jupiter could be. But while it is kind of rough, and this is my chart, I don't look at it that way. It kind of like we make the best out of things that we got. It's not the easiest energy, but hey, I got to work with it. Anyways, Jupiter is about luck, prosperity, growth, education, higher learning. It can be about traveling. It can kind of be like an extroverted energy. It's kind of loud and gregarious. Since it is in Capricorn, it kind of mutes that energy. It can be about manifestation, things like that. But the negative sides of that, it can be like an overabundance, in excess. It takes things to extremes. It takes things too far. Like Santa Claus is a very Jupiterian archetypal energy. It's like a modern Jupiter. He's big, round, and fat because he eats too many fucking cookies, pretty much. But yeah, so like too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Next, we're going to go what the traditional astrologers called the Great Malefic, meaning it's the worst thing in the zodiac. And it's not necessarily bad. It's very hard. Saturn is about restriction, limitation, rules, regulations, security, pretty much where you have to put your nose to the grindstone and you have to work at it alone and yourself, and not really anybody can help you here. It's going to kind of make you strict and rigid. But the good thing about Saturn is that once you do the work and once you kind of get the blood, sweat, and tears, then Saturn rewards you. So like my Saturn here is in the first house, so I have to work on myself. It can also be kind of cold and rigid and solemn, and pretty much, I don't want to go too far into it, but it kind of can make you real rigid and harsh in the aspect of what it touches, basically. Now we're going to go into the planets that the ancient astrologers didn't know about because they couldn't see it without a telescope. Well, you can see Uranus with a telescope in certain places under certain conditions, but they didn't really acknowledge it. A lot of like traditional astrologers still don't acknowledge these outer planets as much of an impact at all. But Uranus is a really interesting planet. It's about revolution, rebellion, like the iconoclast rebel rouser of the zodiac. It's about independence and individuality. It's about like abstract thinking. It's kind of about technology and science. I can't remember the exact year. I think it was 1778 when it was discovered. This is kind of when we had a technological boom. We went from working to farms to factories, and we had the industrial age, which in the long run wasn't good with this global warming stuff and everything, but it's about innovation. So it can also be about criminality too. It's like going against the grain, going against society. So it could be about genius, and not genius like in Einstein had 180 IQ or whatever, like Michael Jordan jumping from the free throw line, sailing through the air and dunking the ball through the net is definitely a type of intelligence. He could do things with his body that not very many people can do, and that's like a kinesthetic intelligence. So like, for example, my Uranus is in Sagittarius, and we already mentioned, and it's conjunct Mars. I don't want to get too technical yet, but these energies are close together, so they kind of blend together. So like I said, I've always been kind of naturally athletic, but I can't jump 10 feet in the air across and dunk a ball. I guess can't do that. Next, we'll go to Neptune. So Neptune, like Uranus, is a higher, Venus, they say, is a higher octave of Mercury, which is about intellect and communication and things like that. Neptune is a higher octave of Venus. But Neptune, it's kind of like the spiritual woo-woo psychic energy of the zodiac. It's also about higher expression of your emotions. It's very artistic and very creative and all about beauty. It's all about social justice and group cohesion and things like that. But it could also be about escapism. It's kind of rules the 12th house. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the personal unconscious that Jung talked about. This is a collective unconscious, and this rules the 12th house, which we'll get into later. Kind of jumping ahead, sorry. But anyways, like we all have this inborn psychic spiritual energy that society kind of conditions us to ignore, saying things like astrology isn't real because it can't be scientifically validated. And if we don't kind of address the spiritual psychic energy, it can kind of result into things like mental illness. It could be about delusions and psychosis and things like that, or it can be about escapism. It can be about like you resort to alcohol, drugs, or risky promiscuous sex, or gambling, or reading shitty romance novels or fantasy novels, or watching TV all day, or playing video games all day, and kind of ignoring your problems and ignoring reality and kind of being in your own little world. Next, last but not least, we're going to go to Pluto, which is kind of the higher octave of Mars over here. So this could be about death, destruction, and war, and giant giant things that impact humanity in a whole. But it's also about death and transformation, and death not literally. It could be literal. Like, for instance, my so this is where my Pluto is natally, but where it's transiting over the course of time, like where it's at right now. Like my sun and Pluto were right here, conjunct each other on this line right here, and my cat ran over and died. So it's kind of like the death of something that was deep and personal to me in my own home life. So, but it's another video I'm going to make in a blog entry, so I don't want to get into that right now. But it can be about taking like traumatic, horrible things that happen to you, processing it and growing and learning from it. It's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. That is like one of the symbols, the archetypes for Pluto and Scorpio. It could also about seeking the truth at all costs. Like you always just trying to find the truth. It just kind of depends where it's at. It's about honesty and fairness too. So Pluto is one of my favorite energies, but it's a heavy energy. All right. So that's it for the 10 planets. So we got the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So again, this is my chart. This is where it is in my chart. So where it's at in your chart. If you want a reading, hopefully by the time this up, my website's up. You can go to www.nichols.astrology.com and book a birth chart reading. But this is a good instructional video for you to go back and learn the basics. Thank you for watching.